Nobody takes better selfies than you, I must tell you.
Well, I'm here with a true Superman, John Barbour. John, wonderful to see you again.
Oh, Jason, listen, I'm delighted. I'm one of your biggest fans. First of all, I loved all the walking journalism that you do when you were back in New York and you were going into hospitals and you were looking for patients. I just loved it. And you saw you the other day on Las Vegas Boulevard with a fellow that was really, really interesting. I just loved all the walking stuff you do, and now you're here to walk around in my office. This is terrific.
Well, and I'm so flattered that you would be a fan of Crowdsource the Truth because, John, you are one of the most famous guys.
That's not famous.
Well, but you were in the 70s and the 60s, the 70s and 80s. I mean, you are the godfather of reality TV. You've hosted just so many talk shows. You've stood in on the Tonight Show, right?
Yeah, well, no, it was Sinatra co-host. He took over the Tonight Show, and I was his private writer for 4.5 years. I met him by accident. As a matter of fact, Jason, all the fabulous things that have happened to me in my life, you mentioned Godfather of Reality Television. There is, on the wall, is the picture from the TV Guide of the #1 show in America, the most successful show in the history of American television at its height. 1/2 of every household in America was watching my show.
Including me.
Including you. And then over here on the right is a picture of, if you're sneezing.
We are in a cat-tastic office.
Yeah, well, the thing is that I love cats, and I've rescued 3 of them. And Mark Twain, who is my second favorite writer, said, show me a man who loves cats, and that's all I need to know about him. So we have 3 cats in the house, all rescued. But in any event, I was going to say, that picture on the wall there is Frank Sinatra's favorite picture of himself. And the first time I met him, I saw him when I was 17 years of age. I had snuck across the, that's right. Keep going. I had snuck across the border when I was 17. I was deported from the United States twice. So
wait a minute, I need to pause you because we need to let everybody know that the new book, The Wittiest Man in America, is a Canadian.
Yes, that's right. And thank you for mentioning that. And we'll get to the book shortly. But in any event, I came here to be a professional gambler at 17.
Wow.
And I was on a train bound for Las Vegas, which we are now living in. Isn't that serendipity? But there was an accident, and I had to get off the train. Now, I thought the train had been stopped by the Mounties in Canada calling.
Looking for you.
Looking for me. So I hopped off the train. The only place I get to was a bus to Lake Tahoe, which is just spectacular. It's like Banff National Park in Canada.
What year was this, John?
Well, I was 17, it would have been 1950.
Wow. So what was Vegas and Reno, Nevada like in 1950?
Well, I'll tell you about Cal Neva Lodge. First of all, I was 17 at the time. Intellectually, Jason, I think I am 5,000 years old.
Right now or back
then? No, intellectually. I'm literally
5,000
years old, even then. And chronologically, I'm 87 years old.
Are you 87?
I'll be 88 April 24th.
You look phenomenal.
And then emotionally, I'm 8 years old. But it's the 8-year-old that I love. And the reason for
He's writing all the jokes.
Yeah, that's right. Because Hans Christian Andersen's little fairy tale had the kids saying that the emperor has no clothes, the emperor's wearing no clothes. Well, and I became an adult and as a stand-up comic, and when I was taking on Richard Nixon and both of the Bushes and Obama and LBJ with jokes, I would tell the audience if the emperor is wearing no clothes, they should be arrested for indecent exposure.
Right.
Always got a standing ovation, okay. But in any event, I had to get off the train. I got on the bus and I went to the Cal Neva Lodge. Now, my first book, the first book is called Your Mother's Not a Virgin, The Bumpy Life and Times of the Canadian Dropout Who Changed the Face of American Television.
Which you did.
Yes, I did, but again, that was by accident. So anyway, I'm at the Cal Neva Lodge. Oh, the reason I picked up the book, before I left Canada, I won $700 as a 17-year-old for a lot of hustlers, and I bought this suit. But when I got to Nevada, I bought this Stetson, all hat and no cattle. Okay, I wanted, because at 17, I wouldn't have been allowed to gamble. But I was an expert because as a kid, I read 2 books, Scarney on Dice and Scarney on Cards, and I learned it all. And so I go in there and I go to the crap, and walking into the Calneva Lodge for me was like walking into an MGM set. I was waiting for Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland, and everything was in Technicolor. I went to the crap table and I started to gamble. People started to look at me and everyone then was dressed like me. Everybody was dressed fabulously in Vegas. Now everybody looks like they're at Walmart, even if they go to the shows in town. It's embarrassing. But in any event, after a while, I realized they weren't looking at me, and I was getting nervous because I thought, oh God, they know I'm 17, they're going to arrest me, they're going to stop me or whatever.
Right.
Then the bar stopped. Everything stopped, and they were looking at me. And I suddenly realized they were looking past me. So when I turned around, through the front glass doors came Frank Sinatra, arm in arm with Sam Giancana, who was the mafia chieftain of Chicago, and they're flanked by 3 Italian Praetorian guards, right?
Wow.
And the place was hushed because here in 1950, one of the major stars in America, and a week before, Jason, I was at the Manor Theater in Toronto, and for 5 cents, I saw this movie, Till the Clouds Roll By. And there was Sinatra on top of, it's a Jerome Kern story, Sinatra on top of a white pedestal singing Old Man River. And here he was just walking right by me. And who would know that just 20 or so years later, I would accidentally become his private writer and one of his best friends for 4.5 years.
Unbelievable. And so how did that happen, that you became his writer and his friend? Did you mention, I mean, obviously you spoke to him about this remarkable story at some point during your friendship, right?
Well, yes. You know, I had quit the business when I was at 46 years of age. I had entirely quit the business because I was persona non grata as the most quoted and hated critic in the United States, film critic, especially in a town like Hollywood. I'm the only one who's had a review challenged and taken to the Supreme Court.
I remember you told me that story.
Yeah, that's
What was that film?
Well, that was Soylent Green.
Soylent Green, right.
Yeah, but and meeting Sinatra again was an accident. I was the movie critic. I was the first one in America to review movies on television. And then when I was fired from the AM show, which was the most successful morning show in America, originated it on ABC. That's where I won the first of my 5 Emmys.
We're going to talk about the Emmys in a moment.
Okay, so anyway, the question you had asked me is how did I re-meet Frank Sinatra? I never met him the first time in Calneva.
Right.
He just walked by and I was in absolute awe. I had originated, as I said, being the first person to review movies on television. And when I got fired from the AM show for booking Jim Garrison on to talk about Jim Garrison and the Kennedy murder, the only job I could get was as a film critic. And Los Angeles Magazine hired me as a film critic, and I was there for 10 years.
Wow.
And I became the most successful, the most quoted critic in the United States, even though very, very few people knew it. And as a result of this, doing a review one night, I guess I got to tell you this story. I ended up at Channel 11, just a local station. And what we used to do at that time, there was a live feed from The Tonight Show to New York for Johnny Carson, a live feed that couldn't be seen in LA unless you had access to the feed. Being in television, we saw the feed. It was 1972, and it was the date of the Munich massacre.
Oh.
And fortunately for ABC, they had a brilliant sports reporter named Jim McKay, who saved the day intellectually for ABC and the world by talking meaningfully about what was going on. Well, the reason I got into television, my inspiration was Jack Paar. He was by far the best late-night talk show host, better than all of them combined. And I was not a fan of Johnny Carson's because the first time I was to be booked on the Johnny Carson show, guess what the date was? June the 6th, 1968, June the 8th, the day they shot Bobby Kennedy. And Carson never put anybody on the show that hadn't been established someplace else. He never really discovered anyone. They were all successful someplace else. Well, I was successful on Merv Griffin's show, and I got into an argument with him and his producer over the fact, I was signed by Westinghouse to replace Merv when Merv went to CBS. But anyway, when Carson booked me on a show, I said, you can't do a show. And he said, well, people need to laugh. I said, you can't laugh. They just shot the next president of the United States after they murdered his brother and a couple of people that already canceled. And he said, if you don't do the show, you're never going to do the show again. And, you know, he had a reputation of being the kingmaker. Rodney Dangerfield and Steve Martin.
He also had a reputation of being a jerk, didn't he?
Well, the stories are in the book. He sabotaged me for years and years. He was at NBC and I was at NBC. The number of times he tried to get me fired.
Wow.
So anyway, Sinatra knew the story. And at the time, I started to say about 1972. One of the reasons that Carson did not like me is I was able to get even with him as a critic. Because when the feed was going to New York, everyone in the newsroom stopped to find out what Carson was going to say about they're murdering. They murdered these dozen Israeli athletes. Because we know that Jack Paar would not have had an audience. He would have just sat down and talked to America for an hour about this horror, okay? So I had already written a review, and so it's like a scene out of a Frank Capra movie. He comes on, and he does a terrible joke about Doc Severinsen's jacket, and then about Ed McMahon's drinking, and never mentioned the Munich massacre. I was so upset. Here's a guy that has a national platform to inform or inspire America, and he's wasting. I tore up the review. I went on the air and ad-libbed 4.5 minutes about what it must be like to be a Jew in America today. It had, overnight, 5,000 requests for a transcript or a replay. That's just in Los Angeles. Well, it was never recorded.
Oh.
And so the news director called me and said, can you come in tomorrow at noon?
So no recording whatsoever
exists of that? No, but it does. What happened, the news director called me and said, can you come in tomorrow and do it again? So I came in and I did it again. And if you look up there, you'll see a golden mic.
Yes.
Aside from the 5 Emmys I have, the only one to win Emmys for both news and entertainment is a golden mic. They gave me for what I did for the Munich massacre. Then get this, I get a call from the United Jewish Appeal now that it's recorded. And by the way, if you go to my site and just Google John Barbour on the Munich massacre, it will bring you to tears today. I got a call from the United Jewish Appeal. And they said, Mr. Barbour, would you mind if we use that 4.5 minutes as a fundraising film from the United Jewish Appeal? And I said, be my guest. They used it for 2 years. It raised $30 million, and they planted a tree in my name.
That's very nice.
A lot of the stuff that I should be known for, I'm still totally almost unknown. Anyway, so I'm a movie critic. And do you remember, this is how I got the call to accidentally meet Frank Sinatra. Do you remember a movie called The Great Gatsby with Robert Redford?
Yeah.
I think Mia Farrow was in it. Well, that got on the cover of Time magazine, it got on the cover of Newsweek magazine, And the president of Paramount Studios, Phyllis Diller, Barry Diller,
Oh,
who's really a Phyllis.
well, now wait a minute. Barry Diller. Okay, yes, please carry on. We got a lot to talk about with Barry Diller. He's still around.
I know
owns
he's around.
He's the chairman of Interactive Corp,
That's right.
which owns Vimeo
That's right.
and the Daily Beast,
Yes,
and has Chelsea Clinton on the board,
that's right.
and deleted my Vimeo channel.
Well, yeah. Also, I have the American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy on Vimeo, where he'll probably dump that, but it doesn't matter to me.
And he has Diller's Killers also.
Yeah. So in any event, the movie was god awful. Now he announced. Now at the time, it cost $3 to get into a movie in the United States. Okay. He said the movie is so good they're going to double the price. They're going to hard ticket it at $6. But more than that, not only will Paramount stockholders make a fortune in investing in stock in Paramount because of the film, we have bought clothing companies. And we are going to market the clothing that is showcased beautifully in The Great Gatsby, and everybody will become rich. He made public announcements. Now, they had billboards up on Sunset Boulevard, and they had these Great Gatsby parties at Bel Air and in Beverly Hills. So I saw the film, and it's god awful. And it's simply the reason is they tell the story wrong. They told it wrong when Alan Ladd starred in it with Veronica Lake back in the first version of The Great Gatsby, because you don't know until the movie opens up with this billionaire's party with a lot of very unpleasant people just satiating themselves on booze and drink and sex. They're all unlikable. And you don't find out till the last few pages or last few minutes of the film that he was born poor. That should have been the start of the movie. Now then so I decimate the film. And at the very end, I said, the only way Barry Diller is going to get $6 for this movie is if he charges $3 to get in and $3 to get out. Well, that was all over, and the movie was over. And my phone rings. And two things happened. First of all, Diller called Bob Howard, the general manager of KNBC. I never had a contract in the 5 years. I was as a critic because I didn't want anybody to own my material. I was kicked out of the building 3 times over my reviews.
Wow.
But brought back by public demand.
Wow.
Okay. So, and I was only making $350 a week. I wasn't making anything. Nothing. I got $150 for each review. Well, he called Bob Howard, the GM, and said, if you don't fire Barbour, we're going to drop our advertising.
Wow, cancel culture.
Yeah, cancel culture. So Bob Howard said, listen, if I get rid of John, my wife's going to get rid of me. She just adores him. I never met the wife. He saved my job 3 times.
Wow.
So the phone rings, and it's this bass baritone voice, and he said, John, he said, could you do me a favor? And I said, what's that? He said, this is George Slaughter. George Slaughter, I knew, was the co-creator of Laugh-In. The actual creator was a fellow named Digby Wolfe, a drunken, talented Englishman who created Laugh-In. But George Slaughter was a smarter businessman and ended up owning it. Well, he didn't steal it. He gives credit to Digby kind of quietly as co-creating, but Slaughter was smart and he owned it. Anyway, he called me and he said, could I have that line? Could I steal that line from you? I said, George, you can take anything. It's all in LA Magazine. Just take whatever you want. I'm flattered that you want to do it. And then I said, hold it a second. On Laugh-In, nothing's more than 8 or 10 seconds long. Why don't you have me as a critic at large? Because I'm called the critic at large here. I'll come on and I'll write my own jokes, and they'll be about movies and about movie stars. And I'll write anything else you want. He said, when can you start? I said, tomorrow. He said, be here at 10 o'clock. So I got there at 10 o'clock. And the reason the original Laugh-In died was because of George Slaughter's egomaniacal personality.
And he ultimately, I remember you telling me, played a role in ending your
Yes,
show.
he destroyed real people for
Right.
the same way. Because look at, Laugh-In was one of the great comedy shows in American history. I mean, you had Sid Caesar, you had 2 or 3 great comedy shows, and then, of course, the trend-setting Laugh-In. But it became known as Ronan Martin's Laugh-In.
Yeah.
And he hated that.
Why?
And he took them to court. He actually took them to court, and they fought so often the show was destroyed. It should have been on for 10 or 20 years. It was only on for 3 years. And fortunately for me, Real People was only on for 3 years until he destroyed that too, because of my trying to tell Jim Garrison's story. Once I became a star, and when I had the #1 show in America, I could finally tell Mr. Garrison's story, which he sabotaged.
But
So
why are so many people like that in LA, John? When you're successful, people want to knock you off the mantle and steal your ideas and steal your work and steal the credit.
well, I can tell you, when I started, because I want to get back to Sinatra.
Sure.
Let me re-ask me that question, because I got a great quote from Jim Neighbors about that, because we both started at the same comedy club at the same time. And in any event, he called, when George called in and got in the office, he said, "We have a contract to do 4 revivals of Laugh-In." And I said, "Great, who's going to be the host?" He said, "I'm not going to have a host again. I'm not going to go through the other Rowan Martin thing." And I said, "George, you have to have a host. It doesn't matter how incompetent they are." I said, "Look at Ed Sullivan. He couldn't even walk right or talk English." And he was on for 20 years. You have to have somebody that people like, okay?
How about
Find
you?
some. No, I wasn't interested in that at the time, but he could find somebody. He knew every star in the business. He said, "No, it's my show, and it's going to stay my show. We will have guest hosts." I said, "Well, it's not going to work, but I'd be happy to do something for you." So anyway, the first guest he books is Frank Sinatra.
Good guess.
Now, Laugh-In never had an audience. Everything was canned.
A live audience.
Yeah, they never had a live audience. It was all canned laughter. And they would do it in a studio, and 2 or 3 people, just a small crew, and they'd do these quickies, and that was it. So when Sinatra came in,
Oh, yeah.
I had been assigned to write stuff for Sinatra. Because I mentioned I saw him once as a kid, and he was my idol. I knew all about him. Absolutely loved him.
I just heard him playing downstairs a minute ago.
Yeah, and you'll hear where we're going later. Maggiano's, they play a lot. God, I have a nice story to tell you about Francis in a minute. And so in any event, he comes in with his entourage, and he's very tough and sometimes very vulgar, okay? And George Slaughter and Digby Wolfe are there with the jokes that the other 12 writers had written. Sinatra takes it, crumples it, throws it on the ground. Who wrote this shit? Who wrote this part? Throwing it on the ground. Now he's out of paper. The floor is littered with paper. And then Digby hands. Now I am in the studio, the only one, but I'm sitting in the back because I'm terrified of, seeing him, because I wouldn't know how to act.
Starstruck.
I literally starstruck. At least I thought I was, but it turned out I was never starstruck. I was talent struck, but never starstruck. And his talent was enormous. So anyway, I'm sitting back there, Digby hands him this stuff, and he started to laugh. Because I wrote, he's from New Jersey, Hoboken. And I wrote a couple of jokes about how the Democratic Party was going to the local prison to see if they could recruit the next governor of the state. I mean, and he started howling and he said, "Who wrote this?" And Digby looks up at the back and he says, "Johnny wrote that." So he turns around, he looks up there like this and does that. "Hey, kid." And he calls me kid. I'm 44 years of age, and he calls me kid.
How old was Sinatra at the time?
Well, I don't know. This would have been in the mid-70s, so he must be well over 50 at the time, close to 60. I don't know how old he was. Never worried about it. But anyway, I came downstairs, and do you know who Rex Reed is?
Yeah.
Okay,
Another critic.
Yes, and Frank Sinatra hated him. You know, he was in Myra Breckenridge, Rex Reed was, and he was infamous for being an out-of-the-closet homosexual. And Sinatra hated him. One of the jokes I had for him was that Rex Reed finally found something he likes, a blue dress. Well, anyway, so I get down and he looks at me. He said, hold it. Aren't you the critic that's on Channel 4 with Tom Snyder? And I said, yes, I'm known as the heterosexual Rex Reed. Well, he grabbed me and he hugged me. And Digby Wolf said, Mr. Sinatra, John also has an album out called It's Tough to Be White. And I cringed. I wish he hadn't said it because the album bombed.
Oh.
And the LA Times, I told Mr. Sinatra, the album bombed. The LA Times said, the critics said it was the worst taste album in history. And I said, I wrote a note to the critics saying you're supposed to listen to it, not eat it. So he said, get me a copy. I said, no, you don't want. He said, I got to show Sammy. So he said, my secretary's name's Dorothy. My office is at Formosa Studios. Get it over right away. So I sent the album over right away, and I thought I would never hear from Mr. Sinatra again.
He loved it.
The next day, on the wall there, over there, is a picture of a letter sent to me by Frank Sinatra, in which he says that I am all his.
Wow.
And that is the only letter that I have on my wall of fame here. And he called me into his office one day. And those two reviews that you see up there, when I started the AM show, these reviews were the reviews of that show. And Nicholas Johnson, who was the head of the Federal Communications Agency at the time, said it was the best show in American television and shouldn't only be in Los Angeles. And he wrote a letter to Leonard Golderson, the president of ABC, and said, you've got to put that host on a national show. Then Nicholas Johnson sent me a note that said, John, I think I just destroyed your career because I told him how smart you were. So, but in any event, so Sinatra calls me into his office, and he wants me to write for him. And whatever you want, jokes. He wrote a lot of letters, angry letters to the editor. And one of them appears
Sinatra wrote angry letters?
Well, yeah, well, I wrote them for him. And it didn't matter whether, and one of them is in Kitty Kelly's book, His Way, which was a letter signed by Sinatra to People magazine, which I wrote. But he would give me 10 brand new $100 bills, $1,000 every time I wrote something.
Wow.
Even if it was one line.
Wow.
And when he did his tribute to Hubert Humphrey's got cancer, and Francis was to be the chairperson and speak there, and I wrote the 10 pages that he read. Okay, so we were intensely close. Anyway, I said I would do it for nothing. He says, no, you won't. He said, because if I don't pay you, you're not going to talk to me again. I don't let anybody do anything for nothing.
Wow.
And there's a wonderful story in my book. You know, I was the first host of the Gong Show. And there's a plaque over there.
I see the gong.
Yeah, you see the gong. That came from Chuck Barris when he fired me over our creative differences over how the show should be done.
So he gave you an award after he
gave me
fired
an award and a check for $17,500. And get this, Jason, they were going to do, they did one pilot with me. That pilot you can see on YouTube.
Oh.
And if you watch it, I hate to tell you this, but I was a lot better than Chuck Barris, even though Chuck was perfect for the show. But when he fired me, they had to do 5 more pilots. And I said, Chuck, you owe me $17,500. Here's what we'll do.
Huh.
You let me do 1 pilot my way, you do 4 your way, and I'll bet you that $17,500 that my way is better than your way, and you're the judge. And he said, no way, keep the $17,500. But he was always a fan. Even,
Wow.
Even when he moved to France. He called me, said he would miss me, miss my reviews, my videos and stuff.
And is it
stuff
not
like
true that he's in the CIA and that was all a cover?
Well, that's all. It's in the book. But in any event, back to Frank Sinatra.
Right.
I go into his office one day, and he said, "John, we're going to do something together." Now, I had been trying to sell Real People for a couple of years, and I had it under the title of American. I had it under the title National Graffiti. And the reason I had it there is because we got a lot of stories from the National Enquirer, and there was a great movie from Warner Brothers,
American Graffiti.
American Graffiti. So George Lucas. So I put the two together. And my Byron Allen at the time was going to be Richard Pryor. We were very, very close.
What do you mean he was going to be Richard Pryor? The next
Richard Pryor was going to be my co-host
Oh,
at ABC.
Oh, wow.
And so I was under contract to Danny Arnold, who was the co-creator of Barney Miller, and the producer of the show, Chris Hayward.
Well, let me pause you for just a second, because you mentioned that album, It's Difficult to Be White.
Tough to Be White.
Tough to Be White. It's probably more true today than it was then.
No question about it.
But you have always been very forward-thinking in terms of hiring black co-hosts and things. Probably
Never thought about it. I'm a fan of talent.
But it was probably difficult to do at the time,
Wait a
right?
second. I'm a fan of talent. I really am. I'm the same as Jack Parr. You know Mike Nichols and Elaine May? You ever heard of Mike Nichols?
Mike Nichols I've heard of.
Elaine May was his partner.
Okay.
They started in Second City in Chicago. The brightest, most intellectual comedy team ever created in America. Okay? And too smart for the crowd. The greatest manager in history is Jack Rollins, who turned Woody Allen into Woody Allen, the movie director. Woody did not want to be a stand-up comic, and he bombed every place he performed. But Rollins kept saying, "Listen, keep doing this, Woody, and you're going to get a chance to be a director." And he did it because that was a way for him to get women. But I don't want to get into that because a lot of guys, personalities, do what they do to get women. Okay, because nature's only interested in the 3 F's: fornicating, feeding, and fighting. And the feeding and the fighting is to fornicate. So that's all nature is interested in. So anyway.
But you were, I mean, Bryant Gumbel, and did you ever want to hire someone and the studio said, no, we don't want this person because they're black?
Well, it comes to Richie Pryor. I mean, Bryant Gumbel was a weekend sports guy.
Yeah.
But he graduated in Russian literature in Illinois at a university. Really bright, charming guy. And we used to chat all the time. So when I was given this Poor Man's Tonight Show Saturday night, and you saw the interview with Burt Reynolds.
What was the name of the show again?
John Barber's 19-inch variety show.
Yeah, 19-inch. Why 19-inch variety show?
Because that was the size of a television set. And when Paul Williams was on it, it's the best interview Paul Williams ever did. He said, the only reason I'm the only guest you've ever had that meets the height requirements. Because
Red Fox was a great interview. Was that on the 19-inch?
Red Fox was my mentor. And when I got my first variety show, I gave him his first chance on television, which led to Sanford and Son. Uh-huh. That is his name, John Sanford. And so it became Sanford. But anyway, I'm trying to get back to Sinatra.
Yes.
Okay. Sinatra calls me and he says, now, first I got to tell you about what happened to Real People. I had wanted Richie Pryor to be my Byron Allen, and I go into ABC. I've written the 5 scripts, and then I had already shot about 10 stories. One of them was The Stripper for God. Oh my God. One of them, The Kingdom of Oyotunji, which was a wealthy black who bought like 500 acres in Georgia and built a village called Otunji where blacks could live in peace. I mean, it was just a wonderful, wonderful, interesting stories. Sidney Kaplan, who was the only advertised vampire hunter in the Yellow Pages in New York. I mean, unbelievable. Because I found real
Did that guy
people.
get a lot of work?
Yeah, I found real people much more interesting than any star. And this is a sidebar thing, because you mentioned to me why I got into television, and especially as an interviewer. I was never looking for fame. I was never looking for money. I was looking for myself, because I came from this horrible background, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, really. I didn't know anything about myself. I was looking for me, and I felt if I interviewed all these interested, talented people, they would give me some keys to how to become somebody, you know. So it was quite, and I was never interested in money. I never did anything in my life for money. I mean,
There's an
sometimes
authenticity, sorry to interrupt you, John. There's an authenticity to you that is just exuded in everything that you say and do. Why don't you want to have a seat and we can
you know what? See here, to tell the truth,
Sure.
is this thing still on?
Everything is still on.
Okay, I'm going to tell the truth. Now look at the back of this shirt.
Right.
Is that wonderful?
Tell us the story behind
Okay, when I made the second movie, The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy, a fan made me 50 of these shirts because I was going back to Washington, D.C. to screen the film, and she was hoping that a bunch of Congress people would show up to see it, and I was doing it at the press club. She says, give everybody who shows up one of these T-shirts, if they're in the media. Because she said, you know, it's not important in this country for the President of the United States to answer any questions. It's important for somebody to ask them. And she says, nobody's asking them anymore except you. So if you give these people these T-shirts, they can confront the politicians, and it says to tell the truth, and if they don't believe them, turn their backs and say bullshit. Because it is all bullshit, she said. So anyway, that's where they came from. Anyway, Francis calls me into his office one day. Oh, I have to finish up with Richard Pryor.
Right.
I had shot these stories, and Danny Arnold said, I've set up a meeting for you at Lou Ehrlich's, and I've sent the 5 scripts over to him. So I want you to go over and meet him before we do. We put all the stuff together with the pilot. So I went over to meet Lou Ehrlich. And he had my 5 scripts there. And he literally threw them down on the ground. And he said, what is this shit? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, there's nothing to these scripts. I said, what do you mean? He said, you just got a couple of hosts introducing film that we haven't even seen. I said, but you see a description of the film in what the film is going to be. He says, it's meaningless. It's meaningless. And I said, and he said, and who are the hosts? And I said, well, I would be one of them, and I want Richard Pryor to be the other one. And Lou Ehrlich said, that nigger's never getting on this network.
Whoa.
And he kicked me out of the office. And that was the end of Real People, of me getting it on the air, because it went around the industry that I had had this fight with Lou Ehrlich over Richard Pryor. And I said, listen, Richard Pryor, at the time, was in jail in L.A. He had done a special at NBC, and one of the skits was edited out by Standards and Practices. So Richie went in, punched him in the face.
Whoa.
So they threw him in jail, and then the IRS was waiting to arrest him for income tax evasion. But when Richard would go to San Francisco, he could put 5,000 people in an auditorium. And I told her, look, this guy's going to be the biggest star in the world, I'm telling you. And he denigrated him terribly. You know, I tried to tell this story late night on Coast to Coast, and the host cut me off the air for profanity. I didn't swear, just cut me off because he wouldn't let me use the word. And I said, hey, hold it, that's not me, I'm quoting Lou Ehrlich. Right. From 1970.
Well, we'll see if YouTube does the same thing. But did Richard Pryor ever hear that story?
Yeah.
Well,
here's what happened. When I went out to shoot on the street, I'm on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And guess who's walking down the street?
Richard Pryor.
Richard Pryor.
Yeah.
So I stopped Richard, and he thanked me for trying to get him on the show, and I was telling him I'm on my way to see the kingdom of Oyotunji. And then I said, hold it, Richard. You know, when I'm sitting at home watching television, I see something I love, I applaud. If I see something I hate, I talk to the set. I'm going to introduce an element in the show of people on the street cutting in and commenting about the stories. Now, I can only tell you about the story about the vampire hunter and the stripper for God, and I can tell you about Oyotunji. Would you give me some man on the street comments? So we did the man on the street comments.
With Richard Pryor.
And I still have them.
Wow.
I have those taped to this day. And when we did the pilot, Lou Ehrlich came over to me and said, Pryor was amazing.
Wait a minute. That's the guy.
That's the guy that said this guy's never get on. But it was over with. It was over with. And so I was literally out of the business. I had quit the business at 46. And you know what? It was the first time in my life I felt at peace. I had a 10-year-old son, and I knew what I missed. I missed as a child not having a mother and not having a father. I didn't want my son deprived of that. Everybody wanted to hire me as a comedy writer, and I thought, God, that's wonderful. I can do that at home. And I remember, because you asked me earlier, when I was working with Jim Nabors at the Horn in Los Angeles, and he was wonderful because he would be this Okie that would come out. He'd tell stories about what it was like up in the hills, and we was making moonshine, stuff like that. And I used to like to sing these ditties, and the audience would cheer because they know what the ditties were. They were Nussin' Dorma, and he sounded like Pavarotti. Coming from this hillbilly was this guy Jim Nabors singing like that. And he became my biggest fan. I was the only comic to ever be hired by that club to do stand-up comedy and topical jokes, because the owner hated comics. They interfered with singers because he had been a singer. But when Jim got his first shot on an Andy Griffith show as Gomer Pyle, he called me inside and he said, John, he said, I must tell you, I'm going to miss you. I love you. And when you're working out the stuff in the clubs around town, I'm going to come and see you. But I'm going to give you a bit of advice. And I'm nobody to advise you, because I come from the hills. I'm new to Hollywood. But what I found out is this. In this town, it's better to be liked than it is to be talented. Because if you're talented, you ain't going to be liked.
Right.
And I'm trying to think of oh my God, the guy that wrote Andromeda Strain, the writer-director. You know who I'm talking about?
It's not Michael Crichton wrote it?
Michael Crichton. The guy was a genius. He was a math genius, a science genius, and in his autobiography, 5 times he says what he couldn't get over in Hollywood. And here's an A writer and an A director. It's how many people lied to you.
Yeah.
All the time, and it still happens.
And
so
try
anyway,
to steal your stuff.
Steal your stuff. So I get back to Sinatra, and he calls me into his office, and he says, John, I'm finally going to give you what you deserve. And I said, what is that, Francis? And he said, fame and money. And I said, well, that's very
good.
nice of you. He said, yes, I want you to come on the road as my stand-up comic. You will make more than 10 times you get as a critic. And I said, so that would be between $3,500 and $5,000 a week.
Wow.
And he said, and everybody will get to know who you are, how funny you are, and, it'll maybe lead you.
I was going to change your life.
He said, I know you're a Jack Barr fan. You probably would be good at a talk show. Maybe this will all lead someplace for you. And he said, when can you start? I said, I can't.
What?
And that's exactly what he said. I said, Mrs. Sinatra, the thing I cherish most in my life is the time with my son. And I never wanted my son. I never wanted to get married because I didn't know, it would be a replication of what kind of household I came from. I didn't know what kind of woman I was going to meet. I didn't know what kind of father I was going to be. And I'm explaining to this to him, and I said, I remember everything I missed as a child. And I don't regret it because it made me who I am, and I love who I am, but I don't want my son to miss it, so I'm not going to miss a minute of it. Well, tears almost came to his eyes. And he said, but we got to do something. And I said, I'll tell you what we should do. And he said, what? And this blurted out of me. I said, we should do an Italian Roots. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, you've seen Roots. Kunta Kinte goes back to his roots in Africa. And he said, well, what has that got to do with me? And I said, listen, Bing Crosby died a year and a half ago of a heart attack on a golf course in Spain. He said, hold it, kid. That's my idol. Be careful what you're saying. I said, listen, you can't hear a Bing Crosby record anywhere now. I said, but listen, you were more than a singer. You were more than an entertainer. You were a social force. I said, if you and your gang, whatever they called the Rat Pack or whatever it was, hadn't sung High Hopes for John Kennedy, he would not have been president of the United States. And I said, so this is what I'd like to do with you. I would like to bring a camera down to your house in Palm Springs. I will sit down and I will talk to you and ask you questions about your life. We'll do it every Saturday or Sunday for months and months and months. I'll leave all the tapes with you. You'll never hear questions from me. And I said, because I will ask you some uncomfortable stuff about the first time I saw you was this Sam Giancana.
What did he say to that?
He flushed. He flushed and he paused because at the time he was trying to convince the state of Nevada over the Sands Hotel that he had no relationships with Sam Giancana, the mafia. And he said, you got balls. And I said, no, I don't, Mr. Sinatra. I just have truths. And then I told him how I happened to see him. And he remembered walking in because he owned half of the Calneva Lodge. So he said, when could you get 10 pages together for me and give it to Dorothy? Because I would love to do that. And I said, the other thing I'm going to do, Mr. Sinatra, is I will find people who got married to your music, got divorced to your music. I will find people who love you. I will find people who do not like you, did not have good dealings with you, but you'll have total control over everything. The second question he asked me, he says, how much do you want? I said, I don't want anything. I said, you know what an honor it'd be to be able the guy that makes it. This will be the first autobiographical television show in history. And I'm telling you, we'll have 5 hours, and Monday through Friday, the world will stop to listen to you telling your own story. And he was in awe. He was literally in awe.
But did that show happen?
No. Here's what happened to that. The next day I give the 10 pages. Now I have quit the business. And I get a call from Digby Wolfe. Digby Wolfe has a contract with Westinghouse to do some original programming. And he knows that I had this thing that was sort of called Real People that wasn't going anywhere. Could I come in to see him? So when I went in to see Digby, he had an office at George Slaughter. Digby was on the phone and George Slaughter brought me into his office. Now this is how smart Slaughter was. When he had a successful show on television, he would negotiate the next series. So he told me when he had Laugh-In on, he negotiated a four-show deal with NBC called Country versus City. Country music, country jokes, city music. And I said, George, that's perfect for you. It'll be a smash. He said, but I got this call from Silverman, and he heard about what you're going on with Danny Arnold about Real People. Would you like to bring your Real People show here? And I signed a piece of paper with him right then and there. Now I'm out of work. I don't have a job. I'm totally out of work. And I go home with a deal that I'm going to start out at over $8,000 to $10,000 a week, getting 4 shows on the air. And it all happened by accident. Now listen, I'm not an atheist because I have no proof there is no God. And I'm not a believer because I have no proof that there is. But there is divine intervention at work somewhere.
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell, America's greatest philosopher, said, follow your joy and doors will open in the universe as if by magic to help you. And my book is full of those kind of things that happened to me. So in any event, I have this deal, And I'm going to tell you why I wear this Superman thing all the time after
I think we could talk for 3 days.
we're going to keep this hopefully short. Shakespeare said brevity is the soul of wit, but that comes at the end of a half-hour monologue by Polonius to his son. So that's the genius of Shakespeare, and the genius of me for spotting it. But in any event, the next day I go in, and I'm telling George Slaughter that all the hosts have to be unknown, that the stars are the people that we're going to profile. He says, no, people need stars. No, they don't need stars. The people are unknown. Like Ed Sullivan couldn't even talk and became a star. Okay, we'll find people. He said, well, people know you. I said, they only know me in L.A. He said, no, you've been all kinds of variety shows. I said, I'm still totally unknown. We will find people. Well, he wanted Susan Anton as the co-host. You know who Susan Anton is?
I remember the name from childhood.
Okay, Susan Anton, the picture of hers in the book, and when you see it, you won't close the book because she's stunning.
Super glamorous.
Super glamorous, over 6 feet tall, can sing like a bird. Oh, and she was a headliner in Vegas. She was a star on television as a singer, but she was going with Dudley Moore. And Dudley Moore is
right. That's how I remember.
Dudley Moore is
short.
half our size.
Right.
So I said to George, you cannot hire her. He said, are you kidding? She's stunning. People won't turn off the set. I said, you know what they're going to be thinking? They're going to be looking at that gorgeous stacked blonde and thinking, what does Dudley Moore have that is so appealing to that woman? He said, no, I'm going to hire her. So I go home, and I'm so used to fighting with almost everybody who's a superior because they do not know what I'm talking about.
Or what they're doing.
Or what they're doing, which is so true. So I go home. My son is 10, as I said. There's my wife, Sarita, without whom there would be no real people. That story's in there, too. And would be no son. God, that's a beautiful story in the book. And if you like love stories. So in any event, I go home and I said, I think I had my first fight with George Slaughter. And my son says, why, Dad? I said, well, he wants to hire Susan Anton. And my son, 10, knew who it was. So he says to me, Dad, have you seen Sarah Purcell? I said, who's Sarah Purcell? And he said, well,
scout there.
Yeah, well, she was co-hosting with Regis Philbin on the morning show that I'd been fired from.
Oh.
So my son said, I know, Dad, you don't want to watch this show since they fired you. He's 10 years old. Shut up. Don't tell me. So the next day I get up and I watch Sarah. And she's adorable. Former weather girl from San Diego. She's about 5 feet 9 inches tall. Needs no script, is charming and ad-lib.
I think it's racist to not call them meteorologists now.
Yeah, whatever it is. But so in any event, I called and arranged for her to come in and see George Slaughter. She walks in. She does not sit down. She stands in the middle of the room. George gets up, stands next to her, and in 5 minutes hires her. So the next day he calls, Susan Anton, he turns down and hires Sarah Purcell. And the next day he calls Sarita and said, can you bring that brilliant child of yours into my office? So Sarita brought Christopher into the office. Now, George knew that when my son was out as a child on Halloween, his favorite character was Superman.
Uh-huh.
Now, Halloween's in November or October. I don't know, remember when, but I have to get the costume in August so he can wear it till then, okay? That's how much of a junk he was. So when he comes in, George Slaughter, see that Superman poster over there?
Yes.
Gave that to my son.
That's great.
And that's a classic original. And I think the back is signed by Joe Siegel, the guy who created Superman.
Wow.
And then sold it for nothing to DC Comics. So that's why I wear the Superman garb, because it is lucky. Now, back to the business of Sinatra. After I signed the deal with George to get real people on the air as a series of 4 specials, I got a call from Francis, and he said, when can we do our first interview? I said, I don't know. And he said, what do you mean you don't know? I said, well, I finally got real people on the air with George Slaughter, and I don't know how long it's going to last. We only have an order for 4 specials, but I know I'm going to change the face of American television with this show, Francis. I just know it. And he said, but the stories are weird, he said to me. I said, Francis, it's not always the story, it's the storyteller. And I'm the storyteller, and it's my show, and I am telling you, it will be a hit. And of course, it was. It was. Now.
But wait a minute.
Wait a minute, 1 second. A year later, Sarita calls George Slaughter and said, George, can you be in your own office at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon? And George says, yes. So he says, well, Christopher and I are coming in to see you. So Christopher and Sarita show up in the office. She calls me into the office. She said, okay, close your eyes and turn around. So he closes his eyes, turns around. She gets it, opens this expensive box, takes out this gold necklace, and at the bottom of the gold necklace, it says, Real People #1. We had just become the #1 show in television, and puts around him and then holds up a mirror for him to look at. And George is absolutely knocked out by it. And then she puts one on me, which I still have. I don't know if George still has it. And then George says to her, Sarita, when did you buy these? And she said, the day you hired my husband. Now, if you want to know the loss of Sinatra, and that will be the end of this interview, which literally and totally, that was probably my wife calling saying we're going to miss our dinner engagement.
Okay.
But our dinner engagement was changed to 8 o'clock because they were sold out. But you're going to love it. We're going to Maggiano's. You will love it. Back
to Sinatra.
Yeah, back to Sinatra. I became accidentally involved with Thomas Taguchi, the coroner of Los Angeles County, who did the autopsy on Bobby Kennedy.
Whoa.
That
Right.
proved that Sirhan could not have shot him.
Right. Burns on his hair and
yeah,
inches behind.
an inch and a half, extensive powder burns at the back of the skull. Probably shot by Thane Cesar, who was a security guard, one of 2 security guards. And
who just died recently, right?
Yes, died in the Philippines. And he was going to talk to Bobby Kennedy Jr. for $25,000, but Bobby Kennedy Jr. wouldn't give him the money. So, but in any event, Sirhan fired blanks. And nobody knows that because if he had fired real bullets, he might have shot the real assassins. So and his lawyer and I created the Committee to Save Thomas Noguchi as the independent coroner of Los Angeles County. We spoke to thousands of people for weeks. You couldn't get into auditoriums or theaters where we were speaking to save Noguchi his job. They were trying to get rid of him because he wouldn't change his autopsy report. And then Hollywood created a committee to get rid of him.
Hollywood?
And the reason they created the committee was that when Bill Holden died, remember the actor William Holden?
Oh, yeah.
Really good actor and a horrifying drunk. I saw him 2 or 3 times at NBC, literally fall down on the ground walking down the hall.
Wow.
And when I was a mail boy at Paramount, I'm delivering mail. I was delivering mail, and he was making love to Janice Page, and they ignored me like I wasn't even alive. Okay, leave the mail on the table, and I'm leaving. Oh, geez, get out of here, okay? So William Holden falls down and hits his head on a coffee table at his condominium in Santa Monica and bleeds to death.
Ooh.
And that's how it's reported by the local news and the LA Times. Now, Thomas Noguchi's called in to do the autopsy, and guess what? He reports excessive high level of alcohol in his blood. In other words, he was literally falling down drunk. And now the story is out that he dies in an alcoholic stupor, is what he died in. Bill Holden was one of Sinatra's best friends. Sinatra was enraged that Noguchi would point out to the public that his best friend was a falling down dead drunk. And he was the one that headed the committee to get rid of Thomas Noguchi.
Wow.
And who's heading the committee to save Thomas Noguchi?
I see.
The guy that's going to do.
So Sinatra said goodbye to you.
That was the last we ever talked.
Wow. See, that's amazing because what I was going to ask you before is that there can't possibly be that many people who Frank Sinatra asks to do something and they say no, and then Sinatra ever speaks to them again. But it seems like he valued your talent and your friendship and collaboration so much.
Because you know, Frank Sinatra.
No, I thought you had a dinner engagement.
Oh, thanks, Bunny. That is the voice of my wife,
Well,
and that is,
we'll wrap it
Bunny.
up.
We're gonna let me just say, she has the best speaking voice of any actress who ever lived. I mean, there are a lot of actresses who had great voices, but Patricia Neal. Oh my God, you know, oh what a great voice, but not like my wife's, and she could sing as well too. She's reminding us that we have dinner at Marciano's.
I don't
She.
think they'll take you.
They'll take us, Bunny. I'm Superman, okay? So they'll take us. We're wrapping up now, but there were 4 people in this business who kept their words to me. One of them was Neil Simon, and the great story about my relationship with Neil Simon, because he called me after I did the Munich thing. After I did the Munich massacre, he was being honored by the state of Israel at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. He said, called and asked me if I would MC it.
Wow.
So I did. That's how I met him. He did the liner notes to my second album, along with Burt Reynolds and Joan Rivers and Paul Williams.
Wow. There's so many things that we could talk about. I feel like we need to do these interviews more often. I apologize for not being in touch more, John.
Listen, I am used to it. I am not interested in the least being famous because I'm happy where I am. I have always done what I always wanted to do. And I never regret it. I mean, I made some horrible mistakes in my life. The horrible mistake of doing the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And when he made me sit down next to him, when I didn't want to sit down, he smelled like my mother. It just smelled of booze so bad. I wish I'd never done it. I've only made 2 mistakes in my life as a performer, but I have no regrets for them because a mistake is an education, and I graduate from mistakes.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, John, it's always so interesting to speak with you. And so, you know, you're such an authentic guy. And I think that might be one of the secrets to your success. But you might have also just told us the other, which is that, you know, you're doing what you love.
Oh,
You never were seeking fame.
never.
I'm so pleased to have come here to meet with you. And but like I said, we got to do this again because I got to ask you some questions about Joe Biden. The last time you were on with Ole, we got into a little bit of that. But I think this was a good interview for today. We got to talk about the Emmys as well. They're smaller than I thought. Are they?
Their actual size. The other 2 are downstairs.
Have they made them bigger in recent years?
I have no idea. The only thing that's gotten bigger in Hollywood are egos.
Right. I wonder if they'll sue me again for showing their statue. I don't know. We'll talk about it at dinner. That the National Academy
It's
of
funny
Television
that you
is
show
suing
up
me.
and do this walking interview because I'm such a fan of yours. You know, a couple of years ago we did a couple of shows which I love doing. So I was delighted when you called and said you were going to come by the house. That's terrific.
Well, I'm in Vegas, you know, I wanted to come see you, and you are the godfather of television. And the other thing that I noticed is that when people go to John Barbour's World on YouTube and watch the videos that you've assembled throughout your whole career, you really see a progression of television technology, even up until right now, where you're doing live streams from this office right here. I'm here doing the equivalent of a one-man band. I mean,
You're wonderful. It's fabulous. And you know, you mentioned earlier that you saw the interview with Burt Reynolds. You know, I had a Trumpaholic who used to be my webmaster who destroyed my 40 years of work and my website a year ago. He totally trashed it.
What?
I lost the Garrison files. I lost absolutely everything.
oh my God.
But a guy from Los Angeles called me. His name's Stu Shostak, and he's the only person in the world who preserves classic television. He says there's nothing more classic than real people. Do you still have your films and videos? He said, yes, I'm going to rebuild your site then. And he rebuilt my site. One of the things I put back up is the Burt Reynolds interview. Mm-hmm. And it's only been up about 5 or 6 months. It's had 150,000 views.
Yeah.
I mean, that's astonishing.
Well, it was a great interview. I mean, it's, you know, I was a fan of Burt Reynolds as a kid. I met him once. And, you know, I was sad when he died in 2018. And that was a great interview. I encourage people to watch it. So people will go to John Barbour's World on YouTube. People also want to make sure they purchase the new book. Just show it to us one more time.
Oh, yeah.
Because The Wittiest Man in America is a Canadian.
Yes.
And people definitely want to get that because not only is he a Canadian, he's an American, and he's John Barbour. John, thank you so much for meeting with me.
And the wonderful thing about this book, you can open it up and read a chapter on Sinatra or Bob Hope or anybody, and it's 5 to 8 pages of literal joy. But this book you can open up, and you only have to read one page because each page is filled with absolute, truly funny one-liners or really upsetting observations that are political. But I'm telling you, it's a joy to look at.
Absolutely. And John, you are a joy to speak with and to interview. So thank you so much for inviting me into your home. Thanks everybody for watching. And don't forget to get John's new book and subscribe to John Barbour's World on YouTube.
You know what is so funny? My wife said when you're showing up, she says, you know, I know you're such a fan of Jason's, and you told me you're going to talk only for a half an hour and tell him 3 stories. And she says, I know you're going to be late for dinner. She was right.
No, we're not going to be late. We'll be there right on time.
Great.
All right, John. Thanks so much.